The wind screamed like a dying animal through the mountain pass, and Owen Nathans knew in his bones that somebody was out there freezing to death. He stood on the porch of his cabin, 30 miles north of San Antonio in the Texas Hill Country, watching the blizzard of February 1878 turn the world into a whirling chaos of white. It was rare for Texas to see snow like this, but when winter storms came down from the north, they came with a vengeance that could kill a person in hours. The temperature had dropped so fast that afternoon that Owen had barely gotten his horses into the barn before the full fury hit. Now, as darkness gathered and the wind howled through the pines, he felt that strange prickling sensation at the back of his neck that had saved his life more than once during his years trapping and hunting in these mountains. Something was wrong out there. Someone needed help. Owen was not a man given to fancy or imagination. He was 30 years old, built like the mountains he called home, with broad shoulders thick with muscle from years of splitting wood, hauling game, and surviving in country that killed weaker men. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, usually tied back with a strip of leather, and his beard was trimmed close enough to keep tidy but thick enough to protect his face from the brutal cold. He stood well over 6 feet, and there was not an ounce of softness on his frame. His hands were calloused and strong, capable of tenderness, but forged by hard work and harder living. People in San Antonio called him the Mountain Man, though these hills were nothing compared to the Rockies where he had spent 5 years before coming to Texas. He had left that life behind after his trapping partner died in an avalanche, seeking warmer country and some measure of peace. But tonight there was no peace, only the howling wind and that insistent feeling that he needed to move, needed to search, needed to find whatever was out there before it was too late. He pulled on his heaviest coat, the one lined with bearskin that he had tanned himself, and wrapped a thick scarf around his neck and lower face. His boots were sturdy, waterproofed with rendered fat, and he laced them tight. He took a coil of rope, a lantern that he prayed would stay lit in this wind, and his rifle, though he doubted any sensible animal would be moving in this storm. Then Owen Nathans stepped off his porch and into the teeth of the blizzard. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his eyes water instantly. He could barely see 10 feet ahead, but he knew this land like he knew his own heartbeat. He had walked every ridge, explored every hollow, and mapped every game trail within miles of his cabin. If someone was out here, they would have come from the direction of the main road that wound up from San Antonio through the hills. It was the only route that made sense, and it was 3 miles from his cabin at the closest point. Owen bent his head against the wind and started walking. The snow was already knee-deep in places where it had drifted, and each step required effort. He kept the lantern low, trying to shield the flame with his body, and he called out every few minutes, though the wind tore his voice away almost before it left his lips. He moved with the steady determination of a man who had made up his mind and would not be swayed. No matter how brutal the conditions, an hour passed, then another. The cold was savage, seeping through even his heavy clothing, and Owen knew that if he did not find shelter or turn back soon, he would be in danger himself. But that feeling would not leave him, that certainty that someone was out here dying in the snow. He pressed on, following the ridge that ran parallel to the road, using the trees as windbreaks when he could. Then, almost buried in a drift near a fallen pine, he saw it. A dark shape, barely visible against the white. His heart lurched, and he forced his frozen legs to move faster, stumbling through the snow until he reached the huddled form. It was a woman, curled on her side, her cloak crusted with ice, and her face pale as death. Owen dropped to his knees beside her, setting the lantern down and pulling off his glove to press his fingers against her throat. For a terrible moment he felt nothing and his heart sank. Then, faint as a whisper, he detected a pulse. She was alive, but barely. There was no time to waste on questions or speculation. Owen scooped her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, and held her close against his chest. She was frozen nearly solid, her clothing stiff with ice, and he could not tell if she was even breathing. He wrapped his coat around her as best he could, tucking her head beneath his chin, and started the long journey back. 3 miles had never seemed so far. The wind fought him for every step, and the woman in his arms was dead weight, unable to help herself. Owen's muscles burned with effort, his lungs ached from the cold air, and his face went numb despite the scarf. But he did not stop, did not slow, did not even consider setting her down to rest. He had found her, and by God, he would get her to safety or die trying. The blizzard seemed to intensify, as if nature itself wanted to claim this woman's life. Snow stung Owen's eyes and filled his beard with ice. His shoulders screamed with fatigue, and his legs trembled with each step, but he kept moving. He thought of his partner, buried under tons of snow in Colorado, and how he had not been able to save him. He would not fail again. Not tonight. He lost track of time. The world narrowed to the next step, the next breath, the fragile weight in his arms and the desperate need to keep moving. His cabin existed somewhere ahead in the darkness, a goal that seemed impossibly distant, but Owen Nathans was not a man who gave up. He had survived mountain winters, grisly attacks, and the loneliness that could break a man's spirit. He would survive this too, and so would she. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, he saw the dark shape of his cabin emerging from the swirling snow. Relief gave him a burst of strength, and he staggered the last 100 yards, climbed the porch steps, and kicked open his door. The warmth inside hit him like a wave. He had banked the fire before leaving, and the coals still glowed red in the hearth. Owen carried the woman straight to his bed and laid her down gently. Her face was deathly pale, her lips blue, and her skin felt like ice. He had seen frostbite before, had treated it in himself and others, and he knew the next few hours would determine whether she lived or died. He worked quickly, stripping away her frozen clothing with hands that shook from exhaustion and cold. He was clinical about it, focused entirely on saving her life, seeing only the dangerous pallor of her skin and the ice crystals in her hair. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then built up the fire until the cabin was almost uncomfortably warm. He heated water and filled bottles, tucking them around her to provide warmth. He massaged her hands and feet carefully, watching for the signs of returning circulation that would tell him the frostbite was not too severe. Only then, when he had done everything he could, did Owen allow himself to collapse into the chair beside his bed, his body shaking with exhaustion. He was still wearing his wet outer clothes, and he forced himself to stand long enough to change into dry things before the cold could settle into his bones. Then he returned to the chair and sat watching the woman, waiting for any sign that she would wake. She was beautiful, he realized, now that he could see her properly in the firelight. Her hair, spread across his pillow, was a rich chestnut brown with hints of red, and even unconscious, her face had a delicate strength to it. She was young, probably in her early 20s, and her hands, though roughened by work, were finely formed. Who was she? What had brought her out into the mountains in the middle of a blizzard? The questions tumbled through his tired mind, but there would be time for answers later, if she lived. Hours passed. Owen dozed in the chair, jerking awake every few minutes to check on her. He added wood to the fire, adjusted the blankets, and watched the color slowly return to her face. Dawn was breaking, gray and cold beyond the windows when she finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, and she made a small sound of confusion. Owen leaned forward, his heart suddenly racing. Her eyes opened, and he found himself looking into the most striking hazel eyes he had ever seen. Gold and green swirled together like autumn leaves. She stared at him in bewilderment and fear, her gaze taking in his size, his long hair, his unfamiliar face. She tried to sit up, and he gently pressed a hand to her shoulder. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough from disuse and the cold. "You are safe. I found you in the blizzard last night." She blinked at him, and he could see her trying to process his words. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. He reached for a cup of water he had prepared and held it to her lips. "Small sips," he instructed. "Your body has been through hell." She drank gratefully, then coughed and finally managed to speak. "Where am I?" "My cabin, about 30 miles north of San Antonio. I am Owen Nathans. You were frozen half to death when I found you." Her eyes widened, and her hand moved beneath the blankets, clearly realizing she was not wearing her own clothes. Owen saw the flash of panic and spoke quickly. "I had to get you out of your wet things, or you would have died. I did not take any liberties, just did what needed doing to save your life. Your clothes are drying by the fire." She studied his face for a long moment, and he sat still under her scrutiny, letting her see that he meant her no harm. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her, because some of the tension left her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did. What were you doing out in that storm?" Her face crumpled, and tears filled those beautiful eyes. "The stagecoach overturned. We hit ice on the road, and the coach went over. The driver broke his neck in the fall, died instantly. The other passengers were an elderly couple. They did not survive either." Owen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Where were you headed?" "San Antonio. I was coming from Louisiana to meet my brother. He is stationed at Fort Sam Houston." She paused, swallowing hard. "I tried to stay with the coach, but I knew no one would find us in the storm. I thought if I could walk back down the road, find help. But I got turned around in the snow, and then I could not feel my feet anymore, and I just wanted to rest for a moment." "If you had rested, you would have died," Owen said quietly. "Freezing makes you want to sleep, and that sleep is death." She shuddered, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Those poor people. The Harrisons, they were traveling to see their son, and Mr. Garrett, the driver, he was so kind to me when I boarded in Louisiana. Owen let her cry, understanding that she needed to release the grief and shock. When the tears finally slowed, he asked, "What is your name?" "Sophia, Sophia Norris." "Sophia," he repeated, liking the way it sounded. "You are lucky to be alive, Miss Norris. That storm could have killed a dozen men, let alone a woman on her own." "I did not feel lucky," she said softly, "until you found me." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something neither could name but both felt. Owen cleared his throat and looked away first, suddenly aware of how intimate this situation was, with her in his bed and him sitting so close. "The storm is still blowing out there," he said. "You will need to stay here until it passes and you are strong enough to travel. I will ride down to San Antonio when the weather breaks and send word to your brother." "I do not want to impose," Sophia began, but Owen cut her off with a shake of his head. "It is no imposition. You cannot go anywhere in this condition, and I would not turn out a dog in weather like this, let alone a woman who nearly froze to death. You will stay, and that is the end of it." There was such certainty in his voice, such strength, that Sophia found herself nodding. She was exhausted, her body aching in every joint, and the thought of having to brave the cold again made her want to weep. Here, in this warm cabin with this massive, gentle-voiced man watching over her, she felt safer than she had in months. "Thank you, Mr. Nathans," she said quietly. "Owen," he corrected. "If we are going to be sharing a cabin, we might as well use given names." "Owen," she agreed, and a small smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Owen, for saving my life," he nodded, feeling something warm unfurl in his chest at her smile. "You rest now. I will make us some breakfast." Sophia watched as he rose from the chair, and she could not help but stare. He was enormous, all muscle and strength, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. His hair fell loose around his shoulders, and in the firelight it gleamed almost black. He wore simple clothes, homespun and practical, but they could not hide the power in his frame. He looked like something out of a story, a figure from legend, and she felt a strange flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with her ordeal. Owen busied himself at the stove, putting coffee on to boil and pulling out supplies for a meal. He was intensely aware of Sophia's gaze on him, and it made him feel awkward in a way he had not felt in years. He was not used to company, especially not female company, and certainly not a woman as lovely as Sophia Norris lying in his bed. He focused on cooking, preparing a simple meal of eggs and salt pork with thick slices of bread he had baked 2 days before. The familiar routine steadied him, and by the time he brought her a plate, he had his composure back. "Can you sit up?" he asked. Sophia struggled upright, keeping the blankets wrapped around herself, and Owen helped her settle against the pillows. He handed her the plate and watched as she ate with surprising appetite. Good. That was a sign her body was recovering. "This is delicious," she said between bites. "I did not realize how hungry I was. Your body needs fuel to recover from what it went through. Eat as much as you can." They ate in companionable silence, broken only by the howling wind outside and the crackle of the fire. When they finished, Owen took the plates and washed them, then poured them both coffee. He handed Sophia a cup and settled back into the chair, cradling his own cup in his large hands. "Tell me about yourself, Sophia Norris," he said. "What brings a Louisiana woman to the Texas Hill Country in February?" Sophia wrapped her hands around the warm cup and looked into the dark liquid as if it held answers. "My brother, Daniel, is all the family I have left. Our parents died of yellow fever 3 years ago, and I have been living with our aunt in Baton Rouge since then. But Aunt Margaret passed away in December, and I had nowhere else to go. Daniel wrote and told me to come to San Antonio, that he would take care of me until I could get on my feet." "What were you planning to do in San Antonio?" "Fine work, I suppose. I can sew well and I am good with figures. I thought perhaps I could find a position as a seamstress or maybe a clerk in a shop." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting firelight. "What about you, Owen Nathans? How does a mountain man end up in Texas?" He smiled slightly at her use of the term. "I trapped beaver in the Rockies for 5 years, working with a partner. Good man, best friend I ever had. He died in an avalanche 2 winters ago. After that, I could not stay there anymore. Too many memories. I heard Texas was still wild enough for a man who liked his solitude, so I came south and built this cabin. I hunt, trap some, sell furs and meat in San Antonio a few times a year. It is a simple life, but it suits me. You not get lonely?" The question was soft, almost hesitant. Owen considered it, staring into his coffee. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely is better than crowded with the wrong people. Out here, at least I know what I am dealing with. The land does not lie, does not betray. It just is what it is." Sophia heard the pain beneath his words and wondered what else had driven this man to isolation besides his friend's death. But she did not press. They were strangers still, thrown together by circumstance, and some stories took time to tell. The day passed slowly. The blizzard continued to rage outside, and Owen kept the fire burning high. Sophia slept for long stretches, her body demanding rest to heal, and Owen busied himself with small chores around the cabin. He carved a new handle for a knife, mended a tear in his spare coat, and found himself glancing toward the bed more often than was necessary. When Sophia woke in the afternoon, she seemed stronger, more alert. Owen brought her broth he had made from salt pork and dried vegetables, and she drank it gratefully. "How long do you think the storm will last?" she asked. "Could be another day, maybe two. These northern storms come down hard but usually blow themselves out fast. We will know more tomorrow." "I am sorry to be such a burden." "You are not a burden, Sophia. You are a guest, and not even by choice. No one could blame you for getting caught in a freak snowstorm." She smiled at him, and Owen felt that warmth in his chest again, stronger this time. He realized he liked having her here, liked the sound of another human voice, liked the way she looked at him without fear or judgment. It was dangerous territory, he knew. She would leave as soon as the weather cleared, would go to her brother and get on with her life. He would return to his solitude. That was how it had to be. But for now, for these few days trapped by the storm, he allowed himself to enjoy her company. That evening, as the light faded and the cabin settled into the warm glow of firelight, they talked more. Sophia told him about growing up in Louisiana, about the grand houses in Baton Rouge, and the way the Mississippi flooded every spring. She told him about her mother's love of music and her father's dry sense of humor, and the way yellow fever had swept through their street, taking so many lives so quickly. Owen talked about the mountains, about the crystal-clear streams and the towering pines, about winters so cold that spit would freeze before it hit the ground and summers full of wildflowers that covered whole valleys. He told her about tracking elk through deep snow and the satisfaction of a clean shot, about his partner's terrible jokes and worse cooking, about the day the avalanche came roaring down and he had been powerless to do anything but watch. They shared the stories people share when barriers come down, when the normal rules of society are suspended by extraordinary circumstances. In that warm cabin, with the storm raging outside, they were just two people, finding connection in a lonely world. When Sophia's eyes began to droop with exhaustion, Owen stood and stretched. "You take the bed again tonight. I will be comfortable by the fire." "Owen, that is not fair. This is your home. I should be the one by the fire. You nearly died yesterday. You need proper rest." "I have slept in worse places than a warm cabin floor, believe me. We will not argue about this." There was that tone again, gentle but immovable, and Sophia found she did not have the energy to fight him. She settled back into the pillows, already half asleep, and murmured, "You are a good man, Owen Nathans." He watched her drift off, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of sleep, and thought that she had no idea what kind of man he really was. He had killed men who tried to steal his furs, had survived by being harder and meaner than the wilderness around him. He was rough and uncivilized, more comfortable with animals than people. But when she looked at him with those golden-green eyes, he wanted to be the man she seemed to see. The second night was easier than the first. Owen made himself a pallet of blankets near the fire and lay down, listening to the storm and the soft sound of Sophia's breathing. He fell asleep thinking about the way she smiled and the musical quality of her voice. Morning brought a change. The wind had died down, and though snow still fell, it was gentle now, more a whisper than a scream. Owen woke early and started coffee, then checked on Sophia. She was awake, watching him with a thoughtful expression. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning. How do you feel?" "Stiff and sore, but much better. I think I could stand today if I tried." "Let us see." Owen helped her sit up, then offered his arm as she swung her legs out of bed. She stood slowly, testing her weight, and swayed slightly. His arm went around her waist instantly, steadying her. "I have you," he said, and she leaned into his strength gratefully. They stood like that for a moment, her head barely reaching his shoulder, his arm secure around her. Sophia was acutely aware of the heat of him, the solid mass of muscle, the way she felt safe in his hold. She looked up and found him looking down at her, his dark eyes intense. "Thank you," she whispered, though she was not entirely sure what she was thanking him for anymore. Owen helped her walk slowly around the cabin, letting her rebuild her strength. Her clothes were dry now, and he turned his back while she dressed, giving her privacy. When she declared herself decent, he turned back and felt his breath catch. She was wearing a simple traveling dress of dark blue wool, well made but not fancy, and her hair was loose around her shoulders in waves of chestnut and copper. She looked beautiful and fragile and strong all at once, and Owen felt something shift in his chest, something dangerous and wonderful. They spent the day together in the cabin, the storm finally tapering off outside. Sophia insisted on helping with chores despite Owen's protests, and they worked side by side, preparing meals and tidying. There was an ease between them now, a comfort that usually took much longer to develop. Perhaps it was the shared experience of survival, or perhaps it was something deeper, but both felt it. That evening, after they had eaten and were sitting by the fire, Sophia asked the question that had been on her mind all day. What will happen now, when the snow stops? Owen poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "I will take you down to San Antonio to your brother. The snow should be melted enough to travel in a day or two, and I have a horse that can carry us both." And then, she did not know why she asked, did not know what she wanted him to say. "And then you start your new life, I suppose. Find that work you were talking about, settle in with your brother. What about you? I come back here. This is where I live." Sophia stared into the fire, feeling an unexpected sadness. The thought of leaving this cabin, of leaving Owen, left a hollow feeling in her stomach. It was ridiculous, she told herself. She had known him for barely 2 days. But it felt longer, felt like she had known him forever, felt like something precious was slipping through her fingers. "I will miss this," she said quietly. "Miss talking with you." Owen's hand tightened on the stick he was holding. "I will miss it too." They sat in silence, both aware that something was building between them, something neither was quite brave enough to name. Finally, Owen stood and banked the fire for the night. "You take the bed again," he said, his voice gruff. "Owen, please, you have given up your bed for 2 nights. Let me sleep by the fire tonight." He looked at her, at the stubborn set of her jaw and the warmth in her eyes, and made a decision that surprised him. "The bed is big enough for 2 people to sleep without impropriety. If you are comfortable with it, we could share with blankets between us. That way we both rest properly." Sophia knew she should refuse, knew it was not proper, knew what people would say if they knew. But she was tired of propriety, tired of rules that seemed meaningless in the face of real connection. And more than that, she trusted Owen Nathans in a way she had never trusted anyone. "I am comfortable with it," she said. They arranged the blankets carefully, creating a barrier down the middle of the bed. Owen blew out the lamps, leaving only the firelight, and they lay down on opposite sides of the divided bed. The cabin settled into quiet, broken only by the occasional pop of the fire and the whisper of falling snow outside. "Owen," Sophia's voice came through the darkness. "Yes." "Thank you for carrying me 3 miles through a blizzard. I never properly thanked you for that. You saved my life at risk to your own. I could not have left you there, Sophia. The moment I found you, you became my responsibility. Is that all I am? A responsibility?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Owen was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "No, Sophia, you are not just a responsibility, not anymore." She reached across the barrier of blankets, her hand searching, and found his. Their fingers intertwined, and they fell asleep like that, holding hands across the divide. The next day dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that hurt to look at. The snow had stopped, and the world was transformed into a crystalline wonderland. Owen woke to find the blanket barrier had shifted in the night, and Sophia was curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. She fit perfectly there, as if she had been made to rest in the curve of his arm. He should move, should wake her and re-establish proper distance. Instead, he lay still, savoring the warmth of her, the sweet scent of her hair, the absolute rightness of having her close. It terrified him, this feeling. He had built his life around solitude, around not needing anyone. But in 3 days, this woman had shattered all his defenses. Sophia stirred and woke, realizing where she was. She stiffened, then relaxed, tilting her head to look up at him. "I apologize. I did not mean to crowd you." "You did not crowd me." His arm tightened around her slightly. "I did not mind." They looked at each other, faces inches apart, and the air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Owen lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Sophia's hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling the thundering of his heart, and she kissed him back. The kiss deepened, became something more urgent, more necessary. Owen pulled her closer, and she melted against him, and for a long, perfect moment, nothing existed but the two of them and this connection that had ignited between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Owen rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Sophia, I know," she whispered. "I feel it too. You are supposed to go to your brother, start a new life in San Antonio. I know that too, but I do not want to let you go." She pulled back enough to look into his eyes, her own fierce and bright. "Then do not let me go, Owen. Ask me to stay. You do not know what you are saying. This is a hard life, isolated and rough. You deserve better than a cabin in the mountains with a man who barely knows how to live among people anymore." "You are wrong," Sophia said firmly. "I know exactly what I am saying. In 3 days, you have shown me more kindness, more respect, more genuine care than anyone has in years. You risked your life for a stranger. You have been nothing but honorable and gentle, despite your size and strength. You make me feel safe and seen and valued. That is not something I am willing to walk away from." Owen cupped her face in his large hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "I am not a civilized man, Sophia. I have killed, I have lived rough. I do not know how to court a woman properly or say pretty words. I do not need pretty words, Owen. I need honesty and strength, and a man who will stand beside me through whatever storms come. And I think you might need the same thing." He kissed her again, harder this time, with all the longing and fear and hope he felt, but could not articulate. When they parted, he pressed his lips to her forehead and said, "Stay with me, Sophia Norris. I cannot offer you wealth or society or an easy life, but I can offer you my protection, my loyalty, and my heart, for whatever that is worth." "It is worth everything," she said, and the smile that lit her face was like the sun breaking through clouds. They lay together for a while longer, talking quietly, making plans, marveling at how quickly their lives had changed. Finally, practicality reasserted itself, and Owen said, "We should still go to San Antonio. You need to let your brother know you are alive and safe, and we will need a preacher if you are serious about staying." "A preacher?" "Sophia, if you are going to live in this cabin with me, you are going to do it as my wife. I will not have your reputation damaged because I am too impatient to do things proper." She laughed, the sound filling the cabin with joy. "Owen Nathans, are you proposing to me?" He looked at her seriously. "Yes, I am. It is fast, I know that. But out here you learn to recognize what matters when you see it. You matter, Sophia. More than anything has mattered to me in a long time. So yes, I am asking you to marry me if you will have a rough mountain man for a husband." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and then Owen forced himself to get up and start preparing for the journey to San Antonio. The snow would be deep but passable, and his horse was strong. They could make the trip in a day if they started soon. Sophia helped him pack supplies, her heart singing with happiness. It was mad, she knew, to agree to marry a man she had known for 3 days. But nothing about their meeting had been ordinary, and she trusted her instincts. Owen Nathans was exactly the man she had been waiting for without knowing it, strong and honest and capable of deep feeling beneath his rough exterior. They set out mid-morning, Owen on his big bay gelding, and Sophia riding behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. The journey was beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. The snow made the landscape unrecognizable, and they had to pick their way carefully down the mountain trails. But Owen knew every rock and tree, and he guided the horse with confidence. They stopped once to rest and eat, and Owen showed Sophia where he had found her, nearly buried in the snow by the fallen pine. She shuddered, looking at the spot, realizing how close she had come to death. "If you had not come looking for me," she said softly. "But I did," Owen said firmly. "And now you are here and you are safe, and that is all that matters." They continued on, and as the day wore on, the snow began to thin. By the time they reached the lower elevations, the ground was only dusted with white, and they could see San Antonio in the distance. Fort Sam Houston sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling military post that had been established to protect settlers from raids. Owen guided the horse to the main gate, and they were stopped by a young soldier. "State your business," the soldier said, eyeing Owen with suspicion. "Looking for Lieutenant Daniel Norris," Owen said. "His sister is here." The soldier's eyes widened as he looked at Sophia. "Madam, are you Sophia Norris? Lieutenant Norris has been frantic." The stage from Louisiana never arrived, and when they found the wreck yesterday, they thought everyone had died. "Please take us to him immediately," Sophia said, her heart aching at the thought of her brother's worry. They were escorted through the fort to the officers' quarters, and the soldier knocked on a door. A voice called out, and the door was flung open to reveal a young man in uniform, his face haggard with grief. "Daniel." Sophia slid off the horse and ran to him, and her brother caught her in a fierce embrace. "Sophia! My God, Sophia, we thought you were dead. They found the coach, found the bodies, but not you. We thought wolves had gotten to you or you had wandered off and frozen. I have had search parties out since the storm broke." He held her at arm's length, looking her over. "How are you alive? How did you get here?" Sophia turned and gestured to Owen, who had dismounted and stood holding his horse's reins. "This is Owen Nathans. He found me in the blizzard and saved my life. Daniel, if not for him, I would have died out there." Daniel strode forward and offered his hand to Owen, his grip firm and grateful. "Mr. Nathans, I cannot thank you enough. My sister is all the family I have left. You have given me back the most precious thing in the world." Owen shook his hand, liking the young lieutenant's honest emotion. "I only did what any decent man would do." "That is not true, and you know it," Daniel said. 3 miles you carried her, the soldiers told me. 3 miles through a blizzard. That is not just decency, that is heroism." Owen looked uncomfortable with the praise, and Sophia took pity on him. "Daniel, there is something we need to tell you." Her brother looked between them, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "Something happened out there." "We fell in love," Sophia said simply. "I know it sounds impossible, but it is true, and Owen has asked me to marry him, and I said yes." Daniel was silent for a moment, studying Owen carefully. Then he said, "Mr. Nathans, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Owen nodded and followed Daniel a short distance away, leaving Sophia with the young soldier. The two men faced each other, and Daniel spoke in a low voice. "My sister is everything to me, Mr. Nathans. She is smart and strong and deserves a good life. Can you give her that?" "I have a cabin and land, and I make a living from hunting and trapping," Owen said honestly. "It is not a fancy life, but it is honest and free. I will work every day to provide for her and keep her safe. I will honor her and cherish her for as long as I draw breath. And I will love her with everything I have, Lieutenant, that I can promise you." Daniel searched his face, seeing the absolute sincerity there. "She has only known you 3 days. I know, it is fast, too fast by normal standards. But I have lived enough to know that some things are certain from the first moment. Your sister is the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met, and I would be honored to spend my life with her. But if you think I am not good enough for her, I will walk away. Her happiness matters more than my own." The lieutenant was quiet for another moment, then extended his hand again. "Welcome to the family, Owen. Take care of my sister and we will have no problems." Relief washed over Owen's face, and he shook Daniel's hand firmly. "You have my word." They returned to Sophia, who looked anxiously between them. Daniel smiled at her and said, "I give you my blessing, Sophia, though I think you would have married him regardless of what I said." She laughed and hugged her brother. "You know me too well, but I am glad to have your approval. It means everything." "When is the wedding?" "As soon as we can find a preacher," Owen said. "I will not take her back to my cabin until she is my wife in the eyes of God and the law." Daniel nodded approvingly. "There is a chaplain here at the fort who can perform the ceremony. Give me an hour to make arrangements." True to his word, Daniel worked quickly. Within 2 hours, they were standing in the fort's chapel, a simple wooden building with plain benches and a cross on the wall. The chaplain was an older man with kind eyes, and he seemed pleased to be performing a wedding rather than a funeral, which had been his main duty lately. Daniel stood as a witness, along with 2 of his fellow officers. Sophia wore the same blue dress she had put on that morning, though someone had found her a simple bouquet of dried flowers. Owen stood beside her in his clean but plain clothes, his long hair tied back, his hand dwarfing hers as they joined. The ceremony was brief and traditional. They spoke their vows in clear, firm voices, Owen's deep and resonant, Sophia's sweet and strong. When the chaplain pronounced them man and wife, Owen kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the watching soldiers smile. Afterward, Daniel insisted they join him for a meal at the officers' mess, and they spent the evening with Sophia's brother and his friends. The soldiers were curious about Owen, asking about his life in the mountains, and he answered their questions with surprising patience, relaxing as the evening wore on. As night fell, Daniel pulled Sophia aside. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. "It is not too late to change your mind. You could stay here at the fort with me, find work in San Antonio." Sophia took her brother's hand. "I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life, Daniel. Owen is a good man, the best I have ever known, and I love him." "You really do not you?" Daniel sounded amazed. "After 3 days. After 3 minutes, if I am honest," Sophia said with a smile. "The rest was just confirmation." Daniel hugged her tightly. "Then I am happy for you, sister, but you must promise to write me and to visit when you can." "I promise. And you must come visit us at the cabin." Owen knows every inch of those mountains. He will take you hunting." They returned to the others, and as the evening ended, Owen and Sophia prepared to leave. Daniel provided them with additional supplies, including some of Sophia's belongings that had been salvaged from the stagecoach wreck. It was mostly clothing and a few personal items, but Sophia was grateful to have them. It was decided they would stay the night at a hotel in San Antonio and begin the journey back to the cabin in the morning. Daniel walked them to the hotel, a respectable establishment near the plaza, and said his goodbyes. "Take care of her, Owen," he said, shaking the mountain man's hand one last time. "With my life," Owen promised. Daniel kissed his sister's cheek and headed back to the fort, and Owen and Sophia were left alone for the first time as husband and wife. They climbed the stairs to their room, and Owen unlocked the door, then surprised Sophia by sweeping her into his arms and carrying her over the threshold. She laughed, her arms around his neck. "I did not think you knew such traditions." "I know a few things," he said, setting her down gently and closing the door behind them. The room was simple but clean, with a large bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the plaza. Sophia moved to the window and looked out at the town, her town now, at least part of the year. Behind her, she heard Owen moving around, the sound of him removing his coat and boots. She turned to find him watching her, his eyes dark with emotion and desire. Suddenly she felt shy, this man who was now her husband still so new to her in many ways. "Sophia," he said softly, crossing to her, "if you are nervous, we can wait. I do not want to rush you." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rasp of his beard against her palm. "I am not nervous." "Well, perhaps a little. But I am your wife, Owen, in every way that matters. And I want to be your wife in this way too." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and she responded with all the love and trust she felt. He lifted her again, carrying her to the bed, and they came together with passion and tenderness, discovering each other in the most intimate way possible. Later, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Sophia rested her head on Owen's broad chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. His hand stroked her hair absently, and she had never felt more content, more complete. "I love you, Owen Nathans," she whispered. "I know we have not said it yet, but I do. I love you." His arms tightened around her. "I love you too, Sophia. From the moment I saw you lying in that snow, something in me knew you were mine to protect, mine to cherish. I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," she said, and kissed his chest where her head rested. They slept peacefully, wrapped in each other, and woke to a bright morning full of promise. After a hearty breakfast, they loaded Owen's horse with their supplies and began the long ride back to the cabin. The journey was easier in daylight without a blizzard, and Sophia was able to appreciate the wild beauty of the landscape. Owen pointed out landmarks and shared stories about different places they passed, his love for this land evident in every word. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Owen helped Sophia down from the horse and led her to the door, opening it and gesturing for her to enter. "Welcome home, Mrs. Nathans," he said. Sophia stepped inside, looking at the cabin with new eyes. It was small but sturdy, well built and snug. The fireplace dominated one wall, the bed another. There was a table and chairs, a stove for cooking, shelves with supplies, and a few personal touches that spoke of Owen's solitary life. But it was not solitary anymore. "It is perfect," she said, turning to smile at him. "It is home." Over the following weeks, they settled into married life. Sophia proved to be remarkably adaptable, learning quickly how to manage the cabin and even helping Owen with his work. She could shoot well enough to help bring down small game, and she learned to tan hides and preserve meat. Owen, in turn, was endlessly patient with her, teaching her the skills she needed and never making her feel inadequate when she struggled. But more than the practical aspects, they discovered each other emotionally and spiritually. They talked for hours by firelight, sharing dreams and fears and hopes. Owen told her about the guilt he carried over his partner's death, how he had felt responsible even though there was nothing he could have done. Sophia told him about the loneliness of losing her parents, the feeling of being adrift in the world without an anchor. "You are my anchor now," she told him one night, curled against his side in their bed. "You are my home and my harbor. And you are my redemption," he said quietly. "You make me believe that life can be more than just surviving. You make me want to truly live." As winter gave way to spring, the mountains came alive with color and sound. Wildflowers bloomed in the meadows, and the creeks ran high with snowmelt. Owen took Sophia on long walks, showing her the places he loved, teaching her the names of plants and animals, sharing his world with her. In April, Daniel visited as promised, riding up the mountain trail with a pack mule loaded with supplies. He spent a week with them, and Owen took him hunting as Sophia had predicted. The two men bonded over campfires and tracking deer, and Daniel saw firsthand how happy his sister was, how much she had blossomed in this new life. "I was worried," Daniel admitted to Owen one evening when Sophia was in the cabin preparing dinner. "I thought she might regret her choice, might miss civilization." Owen looked toward the cabin where candlelight glowed warm in the windows. "She is stronger than either of us gave her credit for. She is not just surviving here, Daniel. She is thriving." "It is because she loves you," Daniel said simply. "Love makes people capable of remarkable things." When Daniel left, he extracted promises from both of them to visit San Antonio in the fall, and he rode away with a lighter heart, knowing his sister was truly happy. Summer in the mountains was glorious. Owen taught Sophia to fish in the clear streams, and they would spend whole afternoons by the water, talking and laughing and simply being together. She learned to identify edible plants and helped him gather herbs and roots. She kept a garden near the cabin, growing vegetables that supplemented their diet of meat and wild foods. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sophia placed Owen's hand on her belly and said, "There is something I need to tell you." He looked at her, concern flashing across his face. "Are you ill?" "No," she said, smiling. "I am with child, Owen. We are going to have a baby." The expression that crossed his face was one of pure joy mixed with terror. "A baby? Sophia, are you certain?" "Very certain." "The baby should come in early winter, around December or January." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "A child," he whispered. "Our child." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could feel his answer in the way he held her. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. "Terrified, yes, but happier than I knew it was possible to be." The summer took on a new dimension as they prepared for the baby. Owen built a cradle from smooth pine, carving it with infinite care. Sophia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her fingers flying over the fabric. They talked endlessly about names and what kind of parents they wanted to be, about hopes and fears for this new life they had created. In September, they made the journey to San Antonio as promised. Daniel was overjoyed at the news that he would be an uncle, and he insisted on throwing a celebration at the fort. They stayed for 2 weeks, and Sophia consulted with the fort's doctor about her pregnancy. He pronounced her healthy and told Owen to take good care of her, advice that Owen took very seriously. On the journey back to the cabin, they were caught in an early autumn rainstorm. Owen immediately became protective, wrapping Sophia in his coat and riding hard for shelter. She laughed at his worry. Owen, I am not made of spun glass. A little rain will not hurt me or the baby. I am not taking any chances, he said firmly. I carried you out of a blizzard once. I will not lose you to a rainstorm. They made it back to the cabin safely, and as they dried off by the fire, Sophia felt a surge of love for this man who worried so much, who cared so deeply, who loved so fiercely. Autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors, and the cabin was cozy as they prepared for winter. Owen hunted extra game and put by additional supplies, determined that Sophia and the baby would want for nothing. He cut firewood until the stacks reached nearly to the roof, and he made sure every crack in the cabin walls was sealed against the cold. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in late November. Sophia's belly was round now, and she moved more carefully, but she was healthy and glowing with pregnancy. Owen had become almost comically protective, insisting she rest often and not lift anything heavy. I am going to go mad if you do not stop hovering, she told him one day, though her tone was affectionate. I cannot help it, he admitted. The thought of anything happening to you or the baby terrifies me. She took his face in her hands and kissed him. We are both fine, Owen. Strong and healthy. You need to trust that. He tried, but old fears died hard. The memory of finding her nearly frozen in the snow haunted him, the image of how close he had come to losing her before he even really had her. On a clear, cold night in mid-December, Sophia woke Owen from sleep, her hand gripping his arm. Owen, it is time. The baby is coming. He was out of bed instantly, terror and excitement warring in his chest. They had discussed this, had prepared as much as they could. There was no time to ride to San Antonio for a doctor. They would have to manage on their own. Owen lit every lamp in the cabin, built up the fire, and boiled water as Sophia had instructed. She was calm, walking around the cabin during the early contractions, breathing through them. As the hours passed and the labor intensified, Owen stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, offering what comfort he could. You are the strongest person I know, he told her as she gripped his hand through a particularly strong contraction. You survived a blizzard. You can do this. That blizzard was easier, she gasped, but there was a glint of humor in her eyes. Dawn was breaking when the baby finally came, emerging into the world with a lusty cry that filled the cabin with sound and life. Owen caught the child carefully, his hands steady despite his racing heart, and he saw that they had a son. Sophia, it is a boy, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We have a son. He wrapped the baby in soft blankets and placed him in Sophia's arms. She looked down at the tiny face, perfect and red and screaming, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Hello, little one, she whispered. We have been waiting for you. Owen knelt beside the bed, one arm around Sophia and one hand gently touching his son's head. The baby was so small, so fragile, and Owen felt the full weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This tiny person would depend on him and Sophia for everything. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. What should we name him? Sophia asked, looking up at Owen. They had discussed names endlessly but had never quite decided. Now, looking at his son, Owen knew. Samuel, he said. After my partner who died, Samuel Nathans. Samuel, Sophia repeated, testing the name. I like it. Samuel Daniel Nathans, after both his uncle and your friend. Perfect, Owen said and kissed her forehead. You were amazing, Sophia, so brave and strong. We make a good team, she said tiredly, but her smile was radiant. The first weeks with the baby were exhausting and joyful. Samuel was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Owen took over most of the cabin work, insisting that Sophia rest and focus on the baby. He would hold Samuel for hours, this tiny person cradled carefully in his large hands, and sing old songs he remembered from his childhood. Sophia would watch them together, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Owen, the mountain man who claimed to be rough and uncivilized, was the gentlest father she could imagine. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Samuel when he fussed, and looked at his son with such wonder and love that it brought tears to her eyes. Winter deepened, and the cabin became their entire world. Snow fell heavily, sealing them in, but they did not mind. They had each other, they had Samuel, and that was enough. Owen would sit by the fire with his son while Sophia rested, talking to the baby about the mountains, about hunting and tracking, about all the things he would teach him when he was older. "You will grow up to be strong and good," Owen told Samuel one evening, the baby's small hand wrapped around his finger. "You will respect the land and the animals. You will treat people with honesty and honor. And you will always protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is what it means to be a man, son. Not how many fights you win or how much wealth you accumulate, but how you treat the weak and vulnerable." Sophia listened from the bed, her heart swelling with love for this man who had saved her life and then given her a life worth living. Spring came eventually, as it always does, and the snow melted to reveal the renewed world beneath. When Samuel was 3 months old, they made the journey to San Antonio to present him to his uncle. Daniel was enchanted with his nephew, holding him carefully and making silly faces that made the baby smile. "He looks like you, Owen," Daniel said. "Same dark hair and strong features." "He has Sophia's eyes," Owen said, and it was true. Samuel's eyes were the same striking hazel as his mother's. They stayed in San Antonio for a month that spring, longer than they had intended. But it was good for Sophia to be around other women, to have help with the baby and adult conversation. Owen found that he did not mind town as much when he had his family with him. Everything was better with them at his side. But eventually, they were ready to return to their cabin, to the peace and solitude they had come to cherish. The mountains called to them, and they answered, riding home through a world bursting with spring growth. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew from baby to toddler to boy, strong and adventurous like his father, but with his mother's quick mind and kind heart. When he was 2, Sophia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace, and 2 years after that, another son they called James. The cabin expanded with their family. Owen built additional rooms, creating space for the children. The once solitary mountain man had become the center of a bustling household, and he loved every chaotic moment of it. He taught his children the ways of the wilderness, how to track and hunt, how to respect nature and live in harmony with the land. But Sophia taught them too, ensuring they could read and write and figure numbers, determined that her children would have opportunities beyond the mountains if they wanted them. Daniel visited regularly, becoming a beloved uncle who brought presents and stories from the wider world. He eventually married a school teacher from San Antonio, and they would bring their own children to the cabin for visits. The two families grew close, connected by blood and love and shared experience. On their 10th anniversary, Owen and Sophia stood on the porch of their cabin, watching their 3 children play in the yard. Samuel, at 9, was teaching Grace and James how to skip stones in the nearby creek. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Sophia asked, leaning into Owen's solid warmth. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you in that snow," he said, his arm around her shoulders. "And sometimes it feels like I have known you my whole life. Do you ever regret it, giving up your solitude, taking on a wife and family?" He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes serious. "Sophia Nathans, You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children are the greatest joy and purpose I have ever known. I thank God every single day that I felt that pull to go out in the blizzard, that I found you in time, that you agreed to stay with me. You gave me a life I did not even know I wanted, and I would not trade a single moment of it." She kissed him, long and deep, and when they parted there were tears in both their eyes. "I love you, mountain man," she said softly. "I love you too, my brave girl," he replied, "forever and always." They stood together, watching their children play, and both knew that their story was still being written, that there were many more years and adventures ahead. But whatever came, they would face it together, just as they had faced that blizzard 10 years ago. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and the Nathans family went inside to the warmth and light of home, where laughter and love filled every corner, where a fire always burned in the hearth, and where two people who had found each other against all odds continued to build a life of extraordinary, ordinary moments. Years continued to pass in a rhythm as natural as the seasons. Samuel grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's size and his mother's sharp mind. By 15, he could track a deer through underbrush that left no visible trail and solve mathematical problems that left Owen scratching his head. Grace, at 13, was a perfect blend of both parents, with her father's love of the wilderness and her mother's social grace. James, the youngest at 11, was quieter than his siblings but possessed a keen eye for detail and a patience that served him well in learning his father's skills. Owen had long since stopped thinking of himself as a solitary mountain man. He was a father, a husband, a man whose life was measured not in solitude but in connection. The cabin that had once housed only him now rang with voices and laughter, and he could not imagine it any other way. Sophia had never regretted her choice, not once in all the years. There were challenges, certainly. Winters could be brutal, supplies sometimes ran low, and raising 3 children in relative isolation required creativity and determination. But she had Owen beside her, steady and strong, and together they had built something beautiful. One autumn evening, when the children were busy with their own pursuits, Owen and Sophia took a walk to the spot where he had found her all those years ago. The fallen pine was still there, weathered and moss-covered now, a silent witness to the night that had changed both their lives. "I think about that night often," Sophia said, her hand in Owen's as they stood looking at the old tree. "How close I came to never seeing another sunrise. How differently my life could have gone." "I think about it too," Owen admitted. "The fear I felt when I first saw you, not knowing if you were alive, the weight of you in my arms as I carried you home, the certainty I felt even then that finding you meant something." "Did you know you would fall in love with me?" she asked, smiling up at him. "I think some part of me did," he said honestly. "You were so brave, Sophia. Even half frozen and facing death, you fought to survive. You could have given up out there in the snow, but you did not. That strength drew me to you from the first moment. And your strength saved me," she said. "Not just physically, though carrying me 3 miles through a blizzard was certainly heroic, but you saved me in other ways too. You gave me purpose and belonging. You gave me a family and a home. You gave me love." They stood in silence for a moment, remembering, then turned and walked back toward the cabin together. Through the windows they could see their children inside, Samuel helping James with something, Grace reading by lamplight. It was a scene of perfect domestic contentment, and both parents felt a deep sense of gratitude. That winter brought another blizzard, not as severe as the one that had brought them together, but significant nonetheless. They were prepared now, with ample supplies and a sturdy cabin. The family weathered the storm together, playing games, telling stories, and staying warm by the fire, When spring came and the snow melted, they discovered that a young couple had moved into a cabin about 5 miles away. Owen and Sophia welcomed the new neighbors, remembering their own early days. The couple, newly married and adjusting to mountain life, reminded them so much of themselves that it was almost like looking in a mirror to the past. Sophia took the young wife under her wing, teaching her the skills she had learned over the years. Owen helped the young husband with practical matters, sharing knowledge about hunting and trapping and surviving in the wilderness. They formed a friendship that enriched all their lives, and suddenly, the mountains felt a little less isolated, a little more like a community. By the time Samuel turned 18, he had become a man in his own right. He was even larger than his father, standing 6.5 feet tall, with the same dark hair and powerful build. But he had learned from Owen not just how to survive in the wilderness, but how to be a good man. He was gentle with his siblings, respectful to his parents, and kind to everyone he met. That summer, a family traveling through the area suffered a broken wagon wheel near the Nathans' property. Samuel happened upon them and immediately offered assistance. Among the travelers was a young woman named Emma, and from the moment Samuel saw her, he was smitten. By the time the wagon was repaired and the family continued on their journey, Samuel had asked Emma's father for permission to write to her, and she had agreed with a blush and a smile. Watching his son fall in love reminded Owen of his own story. He pulled Samuel aside one evening and said, "Love is not always convenient or expected, son. Sometimes it comes at you like a storm, and you have to decide whether to take shelter or stand in it and let it change you. Your mother and I, we stood in the storm, and it was the best decision of my life." "I think Emma might be my storm," Samuel said, his usually confident voice uncertain. "Then do not run from it," Owen advised. "When you find someone who makes you want to be better, who makes you feel like you have finally found your place in the world, you hold on to that. You fight for it. You cherish it every single day." Samuel took his father's advice to heart. Over the following year, he and Emma exchanged letters regularly, and when he turned 19, he made the journey to her family's home in Dallas and asked her to marry him. She said yes, without hesitation, and they were married in a simple ceremony with both families present. Owen and Sophia stood together at their son's wedding, watching him begin his own journey with the woman he loved, and they felt the bittersweetness of seeing a child grow up and leave while also feeling immense pride in the man he had become. Samuel and Emma built their own cabin a few miles from Owen and Sophia's, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to establish their own life. It was a pattern that would repeat with Grace and James as they grew older, each finding love and building their own homes within the community that was slowly forming in these mountains. By the time Owen turned 50, he was a grandfather several times over. His dark hair had threads of silver now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into mountain sun. But he was still strong, still capable, still the same man who had carried Sophia through a blizzard 2 decades earlier. Sophia, at 45, was still beautiful, her hazel eyes still bright and her spirit still adventurous. She had settled into her role as matriarch of the growing family, and her cabin was often filled with children and grandchildren seeking her wisdom or just her presence. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, just the two of them for once with all the children and grandchildren in their own homes, Owen took Sophia's hand. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noting the contemplative expression on his face. "About how one decision can change everything," he said. "If I had ignored that feeling the night of the blizzard, if I had stayed inside where it was warm and safe, I would have missed out on all of this. On you, on our children, on the life we have built. One decision, Sophia. That is all it took. But you did not ignore it, she said, squeezing his hand. You went out into that storm because that is who you are, Owen. You are a man who helps people, who does not turn away when someone needs you. That is why I fell in love with you, and that is why our children are good people. They learned from your example. Our children are good people because of you, he countered. You brought civilization and grace to this wild place. You taught them compassion and education and how to exist in the wider world. I just taught them how to survive in the mountains. We both taught them, Sophia said firmly. Together, just like we have done everything else. We are a team, Owen Nathans. We always have been. He pulled her close, and they sat together as the light faded from the sky. 22 years had passed since that fateful blizzard, but the love between them had only grown stronger, deeper, more essential. They had weathered every storm together, raised 3 children together, built a life and a legacy together. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Owen said quietly, I carried you 3 miles that night, Sophia. But the truth is, you have been carrying me ever since. You gave me purpose when I was just drifting. You gave me joy when I had settled for mere survival. You gave me a reason to be better than I was. Every step I took that night through the snow was worth it, because it brought me to you. Sophia turned in his arms and kissed him, her hands framing his beloved face. We carried each other, mountain man. We still do, and we always will. They sat on that porch long into the night, holding each other under the stars. 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and had built a love that would last a lifetime and beyond. The mountains stood watch around them, silent and eternal, witness to a story that had begun in a blizzard and had bloomed into something beautiful and enduring. In the years that followed, Owen and Sophia continued to live their lives fully and joyfully. They watched their grandchildren grow, offered wisdom to their children, and remained deeply in love with each other. They took walks through the mountains they both loved, remembering their early days and marveling at how far they had come. They faced challenges and celebrated triumphs, always together, always a team. When Owen turned 60, the family threw a celebration at the original cabin. All 3 children were there with their spouses and children. Daniel and his family made the journey from San Antonio, and even some of the newer families who had settled in the area came to honor the man who had become a pillar of the mountain community. Speeches were made, stories were told, and throughout it all, Owen kept Sophia at his side, his hand never far from hers. When it was his turn to speak, he stood and looked around at all the faces, at the family and friends who had become his world. I was not always the man you see today, he began, his voice still strong despite his age. There was a time when I lived alone in these mountains, when I thought solitude was what I wanted, what I needed. I was wrong. What I needed, what every person needs, is connection, love, purpose. And I found all of that on a winter night 30 years ago when I carried a half-frozen woman 3 miles through a blizzard. He looked down at Sophia, and the love in his eyes was so evident that several people in the audience found themselves wiping away tears. Sophia Nathans, you saved my life as surely as I saved yours that night. You gave me everything that matters. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this beautiful life. Sophia stood and embraced him, and the gathering erupted in applause and cheers. It was a moment of perfect joy, a celebration not just of one man's life, but of a love that had endured and flourished for 3 decades. As the party continued around them, Sophia whispered in Owen's ear, I would do it all again, you know. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time. And I would walk through 1,000 blizzards to find you, he whispered back. Every single time. They danced that night, Owen and Sophia, moving slowly to music played on a fiddle by one of their grandsons. They were older now, slower, but the connection between them was as strong as it had ever been. When the song ended, they stood together in the middle of the floor, holding each other, and everyone watching understood that they were witnessing something rare and precious, a love that had truly stood the test of time. The years rolled on. Owen and Sophia celebrated their 35th anniversary, then their 40th. Their children had children who had children, and the family tree they had started grew branches in every direction. The cabin they had lived in for so many years became a gathering place, a home base for a sprawling family that now included dozens of people. Through it all, Owen and Sophia remained the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They were consulted for advice, called upon to settle disputes, relied upon for wisdom and support. And they gave freely, never forgetting that they had once been young and uncertain themselves, grateful for whatever help they could get. When Owen was 68 and Sophia 63, they took one last walk to the spot where he had found her. It was a beautiful autumn day, the trees ablaze with color, the air crisp and clean. They moved slowly now, their bodies showing the effects of age, but they were together, and that was all that mattered. They stood by the old fallen pine, and Sophia said, "Do you remember what you told me the first time I woke up in your cabin? You said I had been through hell." "I remember," Owen said, his arm around her. "I did not tell you then, but I thought that if going through hell led me to you, it was worth every terrible moment. And I still believe that, Owen. I still believe that every step of my journey, even the hardest parts, led me exactly where I was supposed to be." "To me," he said softly. "To you," she confirmed. "To us. To this life we built together." They stood in silence for a while, each lost in memories, then slowly made their way back home. That night, they sat by the fire in the cabin that had been the scene of so many important moments in their lives, and Owen told Sophia stories from his early days in the mountains, stories he had never shared with anyone else. And Sophia listened, as she always had, with her full attention and her complete love, understanding that these stories were a gift, a final sharing of the parts of himself he had kept private for so long. The winter that followed was mild, and both Owen and Sophia seemed to thrive in the peaceful months. They spent time with family, enjoyed quiet evenings together, and found contentment in simply being. On a clear February morning, 42 years to the day after Owen had found Sophia in the blizzard, they woke in each other's arms in the same bed where they had spent thousands of nights. Owen looked at his wife, still beautiful to him despite the silver in her hair and the lines on her face, and said, "Happy anniversary, my love." "Happy anniversary, mountain man," she replied, her smile as bright as it had been at 18. They spent the day quietly, just the two of them, reminiscing about their journey together. That evening, surrounded by family who had gathered to celebrate the anniversary, Owen stood and raised his glass. 42 years ago today, I walked out into a blizzard because something told me I was needed. I found a woman dying in the snow, and I carried her 3 miles back to safety. But here is what I did not know then. She saved me far more than I ever saved her. She gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. She gave me love and family and purpose. Sophia Nathans, you are and always will be the best thing that ever happened to me. Here is to 42 years, and to however many more we are granted. Everyone drank to that, and the celebration continued late into the night. But eventually the family departed, returning to their own homes, and Owen and Sophia were left alone in the warm glow of the fire. 42 years, Sophia mused. It has gone so fast. And yet, somehow, not fast enough, Owen said, pulling her close. "I could live 1,000 years with you and it still would not be enough time." They held each other as the fire burned low. Two people who had beaten incredible odds to find each other, to build a life together, to create a legacy that would outlive them both. And as they finally made their way to bed, walking together through the cabin that had sheltered them for so many years, they were still holding hands, still connected, still absolutely and completely in love. The years that remained to them were good ones, full of family and joy and the deep satisfaction that comes from a life well lived. Owen eventually passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, with Sophia beside him, holding his hand as she had held it through thousands of days and nights. His last words were, "Thank you for saying yes." Sophia lived 5 more years after Owen's death, surrounded by the family they had created together. She told their story often, to grandchildren and great-grandchildren, ensuring that everyone knew about the night the mountain man had carried her through a blizzard, and how that single act of heroism and compassion had changed both their lives forever. When Sophia finally passed, also peacefully and surrounded by love, she was buried beside Owen on a hillside overlooking the mountains they had both loved so much. The grave markers were simple, just their names and dates, but beneath Owen's name was carved, "He carried her home," and beneath Sophia's, "She carried him always." The cabin they had shared for so many years became a family landmark, preserved and maintained by their descendants. And on the anniversary of that fateful blizzard every year, the family would gather there, tell the story, and remember the two people whose love had started it all. The story of Owen and Sophia Nathans became local legend, passed down through generations, a tale of courage and love and the way one moment, one decision, one act of compassion can change everything. Children growing up in the mountains heard about the mountain man who had ventured out into a deadly storm and carried a dying woman 3 miles to safety, and about the woman who had been brave enough to say yes to an uncertain future with a stranger because she recognized something good and true in him. And in that way, their love story lived on, inspiring others, reminding people that true love is possible, that heroism exists, that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the simplest act of caring about another person's life more than your own comfort or safety. Owen had carried Sophia 3 miles through a blizzard, but together they had traveled a lifetime, creating something beautiful and lasting and true. And that was the real story, the one that mattered most. Not the dramatic rescue, though that was important, but the thousands of days that followed, the choices they made to keep choosing each other, to keep building their life together, to keep loving through every challenge and celebration. In the end, that was what made their story remarkable. Not that he had saved her life, though he had. Not that she had stayed with him, though she had. But that they had taken that dramatic beginning and transformed it into a partnership that lasted a lifetime, a love that deepened with every passing year, a legacy that would touch generations they would never meet. The mountains still stand, eternal and unchanging, keeping watch over the graves of Owen and Sophia Nathans. And on winter nights when the wind howls through the pines and snow falls thick and fast, some say you can still feel their presence there. Two souls who found each other in a storm and created something that could never be destroyed by time or death or distance. Their story was complete, their journey finished, their love proven beyond any possible doubt. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. A life well lived, a love well cherished, and a legacy that would endure long after the last snow had melted and the mountains themselves had worn away to dust. The blizzard that had brought them together was long forgotten, just another winter storm in a land that knew many. But the love that had grown from that desperate night, the family that had sprung from that chance encounter, the lives that had been touched by their example, those things lived on, enduring and strong, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the kind of love that transcends circumstance and logic and becomes something eternal. Owen had carried Sophia 3 miles through a blizzard to warmth and safety. And for the rest of their lives, they had carried each other through every trial and triumph, every sorrow and joy, never faltering, never failing, always together. That was the true miracle, the real story, the legacy that would never die. And so their tale ended not with tragedy or separation, but with a life fully lived and a love fully realized. They had found each other when both needed saving, and they had saved each other in every way that mattered. They had built a family, a home, a life worth living. They had loved with their whole hearts, given with open hands, and left the world richer for their presence in it. The story of the mountain man and the woman he found in a blizzard was complete at last, finished in the only way such a story should be. With love triumphant, with family surrounding, with lives well lived and hearts full. They had started as strangers in a storm, and ended as partners in every sense of the word, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most unexpected ways.